going to throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion.
Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there.
Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina.
The pistol. Jackson behind him.
Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win.
And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys, as always, coming at you on a Sunday evening, getting you ready for an upcoming work week and getting ready to close out our preview editions of the podcast. That's right. After tonight, we will be done with the preview editions of the podcast, and then we just have to do breakout players. We'll update you on what's going on in camp whenever we get any sort of updates that we can share with you guys and all of that kind of stuff leading up to the game against TCU, which is closing in on being just 2 weeks away. As of right now, we sit 15 days away from the opener against TCU. So right on the precipice of that night, which is going to be so special for Tar Heel football and for a lot of reasons. And we're going to talk about some of those reasons here tonight, especially with the defensive backfield. But just, with us being about 2 weeks out, I mean, where are you at with this team? I think this is probably the most hyped that I've been this offseason for them. I think this is probably the most positive that I've been about the team. Where do you sit as we sit here about 2 weeks out from the start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, I think, a lot more optimistic and upbeat from the very beginning. But now that it's 2 weeks away, and we're starting to talk about it not just here on the podcast, but at our day jobs. I mean, it's every day, every other day, we're talking in some form or fashion about Carolina football. It's starting to get real, and it's starting to feel real. And an off season full of a lot of expectation, a lot of anticipation, combined with some controversy around Bill Belichick's, love life and the status of his relationship. We've gotten to football. And once we said all along, once we got to football, that was going to be the thing that matters, because as long as we win on Saturdays, be damned what he does the other 6 days of the week, because we want to win football games. And the more that we've gotten to learn more about this roster, learn more about this coaching staff, see them in action, whether it's through the Come Up documentary, the docuseries that they're putting out on the social media waves, whether it's, the mic'd up stuff that we're getting, you're starting to do the one thing that we've been able to do, but maybe it's more legitimate, which is believe. And there's just a belief that this season is going to be what we want it to be, which is memorable and it's remarkable. And it's not just us talking about us in that way. If you listen to some national pundits outside of the Paul Feinbaums of the world, a guy like Greg McElroy looks at Carolina and has been very open, that says, hey, if they can win the season opener, 11-1's in play, 10-2's in play, they could be talked about as a dark horse to make the playoff if they have the right kind of wins along the way. So it's starting to get real, man. We've been thinking about Monday night for a long time, and the Monday night's closing in. And I for one, cannot wait to be among the 52,000 in Kenan Stadium watching Carolina play football under the greatest head football coach we've ever seen in the history of the sport. So, yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to put the helmets on, put on the shoulder pads, maybe a jock strap or two, and go kick someone's ass.
Yeah, I don't know about the jock strap. I will not be wearing that in the stands. Maybe a helmet or something like that. The shoulder pads as well. I wouldn't mind wearing a pair of those in there, especially when when NC State comes around. But yeah, I think I'm at my most optimistic right now. I think this team can win 8-9 games. And, there was a point earlier in this offseason where with the roster construction, I looked at it and said, if this team can win 6 or 7 games, you feel pretty good about where it's at. But the more that we've gotten into this group, the additions that they made in that spring portal, and some of the reviews that are coming out of camp, there are some people that are making you feel like this is a group that is bought in, that this is a group that is running the professional style that they need to under Bill Belichick. That's really what matters in year one, is that Carolina gets guys that can buy in. Is this going to be the best team in the country? Is this going to be a team that makes it into the college football playoff? Probably not. I don't think they are going to make it into the college football playoff in year one, but I think eventually down the line, they could get to a point where they could be a borderline playoff team or a team that sneaks into the college football playoff. I just want to set a strong foundation this year, and I think that what they've done this offseason now has got you in a position where you feel like that going in. The reviews about Gio Lopez so far are pretty good. Feels like he's picking up the offense the way that he needs to. Still a little bit worried about what Freddie Kitchens is going to be able to bring to the offensive side of the ball, because I've saw him personally with my own team at one time as the offensive coordinator. And now, granted, that was with the New York Giants on a temporary basis, but still didn't really feel great about what we saw from him. I'm hoping that his offense is a little more dynamic at the college level, and maybe with the help of Matt Lombardi, that maybe that's what ends up happening. If it can, then Carolina's got a chance to succeed, because this running back room is being raved about. A lot of people feel really good about that inside Carolina. Put up some stuff today that was talking about how the running back room is really one of the groups that's shining. And there's one other room that is really shining to this point in the preseason, and that's the group that we got to talk about here tonight. To start out with, we'll get to the special teams. That'll be at the end of the episode. As Josh requested, we are going to do that here in one episode and just get that out of the way, not have to do its own separate episode. So they'll tag along with the defensive backs, which are the group that has shined the most so far, I think, this offseason on the defensive side of the ball. And how could you not when you bring in the guys that Carolina has brought in? I think where you got to start with this defensive back room is Thaddeus Dixon, the most confident player on Carolina's defense, a guy that really just brings the attitude that Carolina needs to bring. And he does bring along with him some pretty good stats and a pretty good reputation coming out of the Big Ten last year with the Washington Huskies, where he was an all Big Ten honorable mention, had 43 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, an interception, and 10 pass breakups, while allowing just 23 of his 51 targets to be caught for 237 yards and 2 touchdowns in 751 snaps. So this is a guy that fits that mold of a lockdown corner, something that Carolina has really needed. Not saying that Elijah Huzzie was bad. I do think that Elijah Huzzie is a guy that probably won't be remembered for being as great as he probably was for Carolina's defense, because, again, he was part of a defense that really just wasn't great overall. But I do think that this is going to be even a bigger upgrade. Huzzie was a guy that got beat a few times last year. There were a couple of games where he really struggled, and part of that was because of his height. I don't think that's going to be an issue with Thaddeus Dixon, who looks like he could be a guy destined for all ACC honors this year, possibly second or first team, which would be amazing and something that Carolina really hasn't had in a while.
Yeah, something that I voted for him to be was a all ACC member. I believe I had him first team. I don't remember the ballot off the top of my head. This feels throwback Carolina football in terms of the secondary being maybe the strength of the team in one regard, also just the attitude of the team. This feels very, similar to what we saw when we first got into watching this program. And, that secondary with, Kendrick Burney, Devonta Williams, Searcy and all those guys. I mean, those were grade A badasses on the football field. And a big reason why those teams were as good as they were, we have not seen a player. And if I'm being hyperbolic or exaggeratory here, feel free to check me. I don't know when's the last time I've seen a defensive player this daggum confident. That at every point in turn, whether it's at practice, whether it's at media days, whether it's on Twitter, Thaddeus Dixon's talking, man. And he's bringing a new attitude and a new mindset. And I think is the biggest reason for the culture change that has taken place and will take place on that side of the football. And I think for us, why it's easy to receive that is because when you saw what he did at Washington, man, it's not just talk. Like, it's talk followed up by actions, because defensive backs will talk. Carolina's had defensive backs that'll run their mouths, that'll jaw, and then go get beat. The very next play. I don't think that's going to be the case very often with Thaddeus Dixon. And so I think he's the guy, now that you've added him to a secondary room, that, Marcus Allen really struggled last year, but I still believe in his talent. You've seen the leadership and the growth of Will Hardy, something we talked about on the last edition of the podcast. You're now adding Thaddeus Dixon, who's from a talent perspective more gifted than both of those guys, to that secondary room, and it feels like they're poised to be the strength of the team. You got to have help from your front four because they can't stand back there and try to cover 6, 7, 8 seconds every single time. But with Thaddeus Dixon in Chapel Hill, I do feel like this secondary room is poised to really take a huge step forward, something that it needs to do for this defense to be the best that it can be.
Yeah, the thing it is when you look at him and you wonder, well, just how good is he? Because, I mean, you read off all the statistics. He's got an 80.9 coverage grade, but how good actually is that? You go through and you look at, I believe it was Todd McShay, but I could be wrong about this. It could have been someone from ESPN, where they have their they released their cornerback early draft big board for next year. And a guy in the top 5, expected to be the 5th corner off the board as of right now, is Thaddeus Dixon. When is the last time Carolina had a corner that actually had a chance of legitimately being drafted? I mean, MJ Stewart, that was the last one, and that was a corner. That was a nickelback. So now you're getting a guy on the outside that you feel like is dynamic enough. Now, look, he's not perfect. He does have areas where he's got to get better. He took a lot of penalties last year, had 6 of them called on him, one that wasn't accepted. So 7 total that were called on him last year. So he's not exactly perfect. But this is a guy that I do think just brings, some steady veteran presence. The way that, he was able to really lock guys down last year. I mean, he allowed a 65.7 passer rating against him. I cannot remember the last corner for Carolina that had a passer rating that was anywhere near that against them. They are historically known for getting beat over the top, and we've seen it. It's really just inconsistencies. There are moments when these corners are good, but I think really we haven't seen a guy that consistently play after play is showing up and is able to do his job on the outside. I think this is the guy that can consistently do that. And then what it's done is it's created optimism, I think, in the entire room, where last year, even though Huzzy was there, for some reason there just wasn't that optimism from some of the other guys in the room. I mean, what we've been hearing is that there really is a lot of talk about Marcus Allen and the way that he's playing. So we'll transition to him. One of the few holdovers on the defensive side of the ball for Carolina. This is a room where you will see a decent amount of guys that are holdovers. And, with Marcus Allen there, Carolina's got a chance to have a pretty good cornerback tandem. Last year, made some nice progress, only allowed 28 of his 53 targets to be caught and did pull down 2 interceptions, but he also allowed 454 yards and committed 5 penalties. So that's the thing. He's been incredibly hit or miss. The thing for him that Carolina really needs is just a guy that can be a little more consistent down in and down out. And if he can do that, and take away some of those explosive plays down the field, then Carolina's got one of the better cornerback tandems in the ACC.
Yeah, he's got I think the measurables and the size and the length and the physicality to be a really good corner. I think a lot of it last year, he just to me was never a confident player. I don't know if it was just the system that Jeff Collins was asking, well, that he was trying to run, what maybe Jeff Collins was asking him to do. He just never felt comfortable because, I mean, I've touted Marcus Allen since his freshman year as a guy that I thought can maybe been that corner that, we kind of grew up with when we first started watching this team play football. And that just quite simply has not, come to fruition just yet. I think he is poised to maybe have that type of season, have that type of impact this year. I think it'll make it easier for him to know that, that he's got a guy like Thaddeus Dixon that knows this defense, that'll be able to help him along the way, help him with the adaptive process. Now, the thing is that he's got to be up to the task because as good as Thad Dixon is, teams aren't going to target him as often as they're going to target Marcus Allen. And so he's got to be prepared to make plays on a routine basis every Saturday. But I do feel like if he gets his confidence back, you've seen flashes of what he can be, whether it's in the passing game, maybe coming down, making a play or two in the run game. And so this is the most confident I've been in quite some time about Carolina's, starting two corners being, top half, maybe top third of the ACC when it's all said and done. And that's going to be a difference maker because if you have guys that are, at the upper echelon of their position group at that spot, it can help you overcome if your pass rush maybe doesn't get home as consistently. It still needs to be a part. These things go hand in hand. The problem is that Carolina had bottom tier corners, and with the lack of pass rush, these guys just, got beaten more often than not. And so hopefully that stuff flip flops this year. And I think Thad Dixon and Marcus Allen are poised to be one of the better 1-2 tandems in the ACC and maybe can emerge as one of the more underrated units in all of college football.
Yeah, I mean, Allen's got to be prepared because he's going to be tested a pretty decent amount, especially with teams wanting to stay away from Thad Dixon. But I do think that he is a guy that's going to be ready for that. I mean, this is the make or break year for him. There is no more career left for him after this. So I really do feel like this is going to be his best showing. And I think the fundamentals are going to be better under Bill Belichick than they were under Mac Brown because it felt like he was a guy. And the thing is with the penalties, hey, man, you keep taking penalties out there, just like with Thad Dixon, they're not going to keep you on the field. They will take you off. They will put somebody else in the game. Even if you are the most talented guys on the field, they are looking for guys that are going to be disciplined. So I think they will be, both guys will be much more disciplined this season. And I expect that, Marcus Allen will be a guy that can limit some of those big plays this year. Because he's seen it probably over and over again this offseason. It's probably something that's being drilled into his head is find a way to limit those explosive plays. And hopefully he'll have some help over the top at safety. We'll talk about that here in just a minute, but let's go to the slot where it looks like Gavin Gibson, the East Carolina transfer, is going to slot in there. No pun intended right there. But in his lone season at East Carolina, he was a guy that was a full-time starter, played in all 13 games, starting 10 of them at the nickel corner spot in 630 snaps, He finished with 52 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 6 quarterback pressures, 3 interceptions, and 3 pass breakups. He was thrown at 53 times, allowed 36 of those to be caught for 322 yards and 2 touchdowns, and allowed just a 73 quarterback rating, which is actually pretty good for a guy in the slot. This is an area that Carolina needs more consistency out of, more than any position. Really, they just need someone that can actually make some sort of a stand in this room. And that's what Gibson did last year. He wasn't perfect, but these guys are going to be picked on a little bit more as nickel guys. You would expect that teams are going to look for these short, especially on these short routes and everything like that. This is going to be the area with some of these shiftier slot receivers that they are going to target. And here's the thing. Gibson, I think, is a really solid player. I think he's going to be better than what Caleb Cost brings to the table. But this is one of those positions that Carolina has to know. They've been targeted there a lot over the last few years. You look at 2 out of the last 3 years, DeAndre Boykins really got picked on, was one of the worst in the nation in terms of yards allowed a few years ago. Same thing last year with Caleb Cost out of that position. So they just need somebody that can provide some sort of resistance. And I'm hoping and thinking that it could be a guy like Gavin Gibson.
Yeah, they can't get much worse, right? We watch virtually every game together, whether we're in the stadium or at my house watching the game, and I've heard enough expletives thrown Caleb Cost way and DeAndre Boykins way to hope that it could be a lot better this upcoming season. It's hard to want to count on another ECU guy to be a difference maker for Carolina, but that's where we're at. I think that it was a natural decision when Belichick got hired for them to go find someone else and try to upgrade that position and just find someone that can do the job that Caleb Cost could not. And so hopefully that's what Gavin Gibson can be. I think you like the fact that he's also, you're going to be having with potentially all seniors maybe starting in that defensive backfield. I don't think that is something to underestimate. No, they haven't all played together for 4 years, but experience is just as important now as continuity is. And Carolina is going to be a lot more seasoned in the backfield, albeit with the arrival of transfers. So I think this will be one of the position groups defensively to maybe monitor to see, okay, if he doesn't do the job, if this is a guy that's, getting picked on like Cost, Boykins, do they have someone that they can turn to, and do they turn to someone else? Because that was probably the most frustrating part, is that we watched these guys get beat, but there was no adjustment. It was just the same old, and they kept getting beat, and we kept cussing at them. Hopefully that's not the case this upcoming season. So, interested to see what he can do. There is a step up in competition, obviously coming over from East Carolina, but hopefully his experience can kind of make up for that, and maybe he can be a guy that can give Carolina just a little bit more resistance there at that nickelback spot.
Yeah, and if he replicates the numbers that he did a year ago, we're talking about a guy that at the end of the year we're going to feel pretty satisfied with. And that's all that we're looking for out of that position. Just do not get killed, because that has happened, as I mentioned, 2 out of the last 3 years. But we know that it's possible to play well there. Elijah Huzzy did it, and did it at a pretty decent rate. And then they moved him back to the outside because they really needed him out there. And, Caleb Cost, there was just – and that's what sucks, because we thought that what we saw from Caleb Cost, when you go back to the bowl game against West Virginia, we felt like, okay, this guy really does have something. But for some reason, it's felt like that nickel spot has really given Carolina problems and has been a curse on some of the guys that have gotten to that position. So I'm hoping that Gavin Gibson is going to be able to give him more consistency. You mentioned that he does have to go. It is a step up in competition. I will say this is my favorite pickup from East Carolina, because I think you look at the numbers, you look at how much he played. That's a big factor. There's no doubt about that. I also think that one thing that is notable is that he was a guy that was committed to Maryland out of high school. So the fact that he's committed to Maryland out of high school shows you that there is power conference talent in there. He just didn't stick around long enough to eventually get found out, or, Maryland was just not smart enough to play him. We look at some of the guys that Maryland has rolled out the last few years on the defensive side of the ball. Maryland isn't exactly a defensive juggernaut. So maybe that was what it was. So we'll have to wait and see. But the one thing that is interesting about him is that I have seen some publications that have listed him as the starting strong safety. They've listed Caleb Cost as the guy that's in the nickel. So we really do have to figure out what that ultimately looks like, with, the reporters not being able to get a look at at actual practice, really just watching warm-ups, watching them go through position drills and everything like that. Really, there hasn't been any clarification on that. So it'll be interesting to see where they use him, but he will be somewhere on the field starting, it looks like, for Carolina this season. Now, one of the guys at the safety position, when I wrote the preview for the defensive backs, I did not think that they had the defensive backfield officially locked down. I did not think they would have any guys at the safety position that were locked into a starting role. I was wrong about that because I do believe that at this point, especially as we've gone throughout the start of fall camp here, I think Will Hardy is a guy that, because of his leadership, because of the veteran that he is, I do think that he is a guy that is going to start for Carolina. They took him to ACC kickoff. They allowed him to speak in the middle of summer. And we saw that he was a big part of the Come Up documentary series that was released last week. I think this is a guy that you look at his 2024 season, 34 total tackles, a tackle for loss, an interception, a pass breakup, while allowing just 7 of the 11 targets that he had to be caught for 72 yards and 0 touchdowns in 295 snaps. Look, there's going to be a lot more on his plate this year. I think he's going to be playing a lot more snaps than that, probably somewhere up in that 500-600 range for Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see how those numbers sort of translate over. But this is a guy that I think has done enough and has earned a spot in this secondary for Carolina as one of their leaders. We're just hoping for a little bit more consistency from him than we've seen at times early in his career.
Arguably, I think the easiest guy to root for, because as good a football player he is, he's a 10 times better person. And I think he is a great representation of what we want a Carolina football player to be. And the more that you hear him talk, the more you get to see him in the documentary or whatever. It's just a guy that makes it easy to kind of love and root for, want him to be a great player. I think you like him in the backfield because of his leadership. And I think the biggest thing is I think he's just going to communicate. And I think he'll be a big reason why Carolina is in the right spots, doing the things they're supposed to do a lot more consistently. That's been the biggest thing, the biggest buzzword, really the biggest excuse as to why Carolina has struggled defensively. It was always a lack of communication issues. There was always just something that was breaking down, and that was what the coaches were telling us, why the defense was never what the defense was supposed to be. Do you expect that to be changed under Belichick? I think you could see that in the mic'd up video they put up of him the other week where he's talking about the importance of communicating with your teammates and trusting your teammates. I think Will Hardy is going to be a big part of that communication process. That's going to be streamlined. That's going to be it's going to be enhanced. And so you want more consistent production out of him. I think this is a player that'll benefit from the coaching that he'll have as opposed to what he's dealt with in his first previous 3 years in Chapel Hill. And so I can sit here and say that there's probably not a defensive player on the roster I'm rooting for more than Will Hardy to be the player that Carolina wants and needs him to be for this defense to be the type of defense it has to be for Carolina to win 8+ games.
Yeah, and the good news is that it really did start to click a little bit last year for him. It really felt like towards the end of the year he was playing a lot better. He was one of those guys that Carolina could rely on back there at safety. And I think this year, you mentioned it, he's going to be coached not only by Bill Belichick, but I think the fact that he's in Steven Belichick's defense, which is set up a little bit differently, allows him to be a little more free. Now, we've heard stuff like that before. We've heard simpler, as one of the terms that people have used to describe whenever you've gone from Gene Chizik to Jeff Collins. Before that, when you brought in Gene Chizik, things were apparently simplified on that side of the ball from what they were with Jay Bateman. But, the thing is that I think with this group, you're getting a guy that has done it at the college level. Now, granted, it's only 1 year, but they took a major step as a pass defense last year at Washington, really just as an overall defense last year. at Washington. And I think this is going to be something that is going to show through when Carolina takes the field to start the season. But he's also got Brian Belichick, a guy who was coaching even last year, was still on the staff with New England, even after his dad was no longer with the organization. He stuck around and was part of Gerard Mayo's staff. So he's a guy that's been coaching NFL safeties for a while now. You can only think that's going to transition into good things for Carolina. Now, the other safety spot, I think that's still one that's a true question mark, one that's up in the air. I think it really comes down to two players. I think you've got Caleb Cost, who, played a lot last year. They're hoping that moving him to safety, a more natural position for him, a spot that he was recruited to play out of high school, is going to work for him, because last year in 444 coverage snaps, he allowed 48 catches for 592 yards and 5 touchdowns, while coming down with 2 interceptions and 6 pass breakups on the flip side. I mean, look, he certainly had his moments. There were moments where he looked good, where he was creating turnovers, but for the most part, it was a lot of him being picked on. And Carolina is going to need him to be more consistent. Now, it's going to be a different role for him if he does end up starting at strong safety. But I do think that, this is a guy that just needs to get better. Last year, he is a sophomore. So last year, was a redshirt freshman year for him. That is putting a lot on his plate, especially for a guy that was splitting his time between football and baseball. This year, he focused on football. He is away from the baseball team, was not with them in the spring. So hopefully having a full spring, having a full fall camp will help him to be more consistent in his new role for Carolina, where they need some help at that's a safety spot opposite of Will Hardy. They need someone who's going to be able to come down in the box and make plays, but also be able to rotate over the top and help eliminate some of those bigger plays down the field.
Yeah, this was like a kid that got bullied in middle school. He got picked on time and time again, but I think he did show a lot of resilience, because he would, stand up and make a play or two, to where it would almost frustrate you about he would make this play, but then it'd be the very next play they target him and he's out of position, misses a tackle, doesn't do what he's being asked to do. But a lot of that was with the guy that was a young player, a very inconsistent player. And maybe, with the fact that he was here for the entire spring, has now, of course, been here for the entire fall camp, a lot of those misgivings as a freshman maybe get corrected in his sophomore season, and he really does take a step forward, because for a lot of Carolina's defensive woes, sometimes it came down to the fact where you just didn't believe that guy was good, and you didn't think that guy could do what he was being asked to do. I don't necessarily think that's the case with Caleb Cost. I think there is talent there. I think there is potential there. I think the role he'll be in this year will be better suited to him. And I think, the staff will just be kind of just preaching to him as much as anybody. Do your job, be in position, and make plays. Don't overextend yourself trying to make up for what your teammate did or did not do. Just do what we're asking you to do. And when you have to make that tackle, make that tackle. When you have to make a play on the ball, you make a play on that ball. And so this could be a guy that, maybe takes a step forward in a sense that is just in a better position. And the staff that Belichick has accumulated recognizes that, sees that, and will get more out of him. I also think that if he doesn't do what he's being asked to do, I'm not going to sit here and say that the leash is going to be short, but I do think that they will look to find someone else to do it if he does not take the step forward they need him to take in his second season. So I'm pulling for him because I do think he can be a quality football player for Carolina, but it also has to show up on the field on Saturdays more often than not, because I don't think Belichick and this staff will be as lenient as the one he played under last year.
Oh, there's no way. There's no way they're going to be as lenient as the one last year. If he struggles, he is not going to be playing. It's just that simple. Because especially if he's at strong safety, there are too many other options for Carolina. If he's in the nickel, maybe You do see them have a little bit of a longer leash with them because there aren't nearly as many known quantities there. But I would be willing to bet they will eventually turn to Trey Miller. They will eventually turn to Ty White, who we'll talk about a little bit here, both of those guys in a minute. But, I mean, yeah, I don't see them having, the leash that you saw last year, a group that simply did not take guys off the field. It didn't matter. No matter how much he struggled, they never said to themselves, hey, let's try somebody else. They eventually did towards the end of the year a little bit with Trey Miller, but by that time it was way too late in the season. He looked like a guy that wasn't really getting the type of run that he needed with the ones in practice. They never really gave him an opportunity there, and so he was just lost at times. Hopefully this year that's not the way that it is, and I wouldn't expect it to be like that. Now, if we're saying that he's going to be at strong safety, then he is going to be battling Coleman Bryson, the transfer from Minnesota, who, like Will Hardy, was a part-time starter last year. Most extensive snaps in his career came last year, 264 across 13 games. He collected 20 total tackles and allowed 5 of his 10 targets to be caught for 57 yards. Look, this is not a guy that is going to blow you away with the way that he plays. There's a reason why he wasn't a full-time starter for Minnesota. And he's not going to be a guy that's going to end up probably on an all-ACC team. But I do think that he is a solid player, that if Carolina needs him, he is going to be a guy that's going to feature in defensively. I would not be shocked if this is a name that we hear often early on in the season, whether or not it's just him rotating in or if it is him starting alongside of Will Hardy. I think this is the guy that's probably the biggest threat right now to Caleb Cost. It's probably down to those two, but I do think that this is the guy that you need to keep an eye on, the transfer out of Minnesota, even though he has played limited snaps so far.
Yeah, you mentioned that he's not a flashy guy. He's not going to do anything that catches your eye. That's the guy that Bill Belichick loves, man. And just a guy that, no matter what, it's going to be in the right spot, is going to make plays, and is it going to celebrate or bring attention to himself? He's going to line up, do it again. I think you love the fact that he comes from a Minnesota program, so his body is ready for power conference competition. That's a much more physical style of football than what we play here in the ACC. I think the staff likes that as well. But there is a limited role with the Golden Gophers. So what does it look like if he plays an expanded role here at Carolina? I think what you like, and something that I think the staff did a really good job of this offseason, what they did in the portal, was they really kind of insulated themselves to where if the initial guy that they pinned at that position isn't the guy that they're expecting him to be, doesn't maybe translate to the new system, the style of coaching, whatever it is, they've got someone there that they feel comfortable and confident maybe putting them in, and that's probably why there's going to be more rotation if guys struggle. I also think the staff will just rotate more often to keep these guys as fresh as possible. I think that was the most damning thing we could take away from Mack Brown and the previous regime with the lack of rotating guys is, simply put, those guys didn't play because they didn't trust those guys to play. And so they were more comfortable letting guys, screw up, letting guys get torched, as opposed to putting someone else in behind them. I don't think that's going to be the case with Bill Belichick, and I think that was something that they tried to be very intentional about when they added to the roster, was to make sure they've got multiple options at these different spots where they know they're going to have question marks at. And so if Caleb Cost struggles, yeah, you have a guy like Coleman Bryson that maybe does have some question marks, but also is a guy that'll do the things the staff is asking them to do. And if you do the things that you're being asked to do, you're going to find your way onto the field for Bill Belichick, because that's what he wants, is the guys to do their job. And Coleman Bryson, in a limited role, showed he was capable of doing that last year for PJ Fleck in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that this room, they've got so many young guys that these guys know they have to play well. And so I think both guys probably will come out of the gate playing pretty well. But you look behind them, there's guys that I think are going to play at some point. Malcolm Ziegler is a guy that is, a carryover from last year's roster. He was a guy that saw limited snaps a year ago, but was one of the leaders on special teams and is going to be one of those guys again this year for Carolina. There's a lot of raw talent there for him coming out of high school, 4-star prospect. I think the thing is that he really just has to shine when you are in these scrimmage situations and everything like that. But I think he's a guy that could eventually get on the field. And I think, another guy is a guy that transfers over after, playing all 13 games last year at Washington as a true freshman, Peyton Waters. He played, all 13 games between defense and special teams, collecting 5 total tackles. But again, just like what we saw from Ziegler, big part of the special teams unit, played 126 snaps. I think his familiarity with Steven Belichick's system is probably part of the reason why he might have an opportunity to play some significant snaps this year. But both of these guys are certainly guys worth watching at that safety position to take on bigger roles as the season goes along.
Yep, and the special teams reason is probably the reason why, because if you make plays on special teams, that's how you earn trust. That's how you earn your way onto the playing field, and then it's just the familiarity there, where he's probably even today more comfortable in the defense than Coleman Bryson, maybe Malcolm Ziegler is right now. So I do like that aspect of it. I like the fact that they brought in guys that, can be difference makers on special teams. I think that's going to be a big emphasis and has been a big emphasis of this training camp, is to be much better in that area, much more consistent in that area, because, how important it was to Bill Belichick. And for a team that, has the question marks this team has, being better in special teams could be the difference in winning football games. So having guys that can make plays, make tackles, will be much beneficial, can maybe earn their way onto the field. I like Malcolm Ziegler being a holdover from the staff. Great name. And I think is a guy that maybe doesn't produce a whole lot this year, but if he stays in the system, maybe the junior year, he's ready to have a much bigger role. And so as you work your way through the room, I think what you'll notice, as you mentioned, is a lot of the backups and reserves. Yeah, they're young, but there is talent there. There is potential there. And with just the pedigree that's coming to the defensive side of the football in terms of coaching, I think you feel much better about these younger guys reaching and maxing out their potential than the way we felt about previously, where Carolina was able to recruit talented defensive players but never really get what we saw in high school to translate to college.
Yeah, and at the cornerback spot, I think you've got one of those guys in Ty Adams, a guy that, coming out of high school was incredibly highly rated, was a guy that many people felt, I think he was, a 4-star, not incredibly highly rated. That might have been a little over the top. But still, a guy that was high enough rated to where when you looked at the way that he's played so far in his career, it kind of leaves you scratching your head a little bit. You were hoping that there would be some more consistency to the way that he plays. But you're hoping that he's a guy that's going to be able to rotate on the outside. And I think he needs to be ready, because if Marcus Allen, if Thaddeus Dixon struggle with their penalty issues, there might be times where they say, hey, let's take them off the field for a play or two, or maybe the rest of the drive, and let's throw someone else out there that can stay more disciplined. That's what Ty Adams needs to be. But he also needs to be a guy that, isn't nearly as hit and miss. He's been a guy that when he's been out there, there are some really good coverage reps where you look at him and say, okay, this is a guy that looks like he's progressing. There's been some other coverage reps that have been really bad where he's been beaten down the field for big plays or touchdowns. That's what's hopefully going to be different about him in a new system this year. And then when you look opposite of him in terms of looking for that fourth guy, I really think 3 is probably as deep as you're going at corner, which is a little bit of a concern, but I think that just is what it is. But maybe you see a guy like Jalen Thompson take a step forward this year. Spent most of his time on the special teams unit, but is a guy that shows up in a lot of the 2 deeps when you go through the preseason magazines. Same thing with a guy like Jaden Patterson, has a chance to step up this year. A guy that can play pretty much anywhere in the room, safety, corner, or nickel. So he's a guy that I'm keeping an eye on as well. And then the two guys in the nickel spot that are backups. I really think that that's probably the area that you feel the most confident about, along with safety. I do think safety you feel pretty confident too, but you're going 3 deep at the nickelback spot with Trey Miller, the sophomore, who's back after playing 78 snaps a year ago. Seems like the guy that many people believe is going to be the guy in the 2 deep ahead of Ty White. But the thing about him is he allowed a 134.5 quarterback rating in the 50 coverage snaps that he played last year. It's got to be better than that. There's no doubt. When you look at Ty White, he's a guy that only played 1 snap last year, but he's a guy that's a former 4-star recruit. So a lot of talented guys, options there that Carolina can go to. And the good news is that those guys in the nickel, Thaddeus Dixon complimented both of them as guys that have taken huge steps from the spring through the summer and now into fall camp. So that is certainly something that's interesting with that group. But I will say, just overall, with all those guys that I read off right there, it feels like there is much better depth in this room and guys that should be willing to be rotated in or that the staff should be willing to rotate in than in previous years.
Yeah, no, I think this room is talented and it's deep, and you need that in this day and age. I think when you look at the depth here, you're talking about Jalen Thompson, Trey Miller, and those guys. This is where I think the professional environment, like if it's really being established and is being received, these are the guys that I think will benefit the most, because the challenge is for those guys, even though they're not going to be starters, is at a moment's notice to be ready to play and to be ready to put into the game, whether it's because of an injury, whether, as you mentioned, it's because of a penalty issue, or maybe just the fact they want to put someone else out there. But for them to be able to go in, be ready to do their job and do it at a high level, I also think those are the players that I think would really benefit the most. If Carolina, in weeks 2, weeks 3, can get some blowout wins under their belt and just get those guys on the field, get those guys some snaps, in the third, maybe the fourth quarter. And so you can really get a chance to evaluate them in this system, and then they can really show you what they're capable of doing. That's something that I think Carolina has struggled to do the past couple of years. Was in some of those games they were not able to play their depth guys because they were still 1-score games, 2-score games deep into the second half. Hell, we had a 1-score game in the fourth quarter last year at home, and that should not be the case. And so I think you have to like the talent here. The youth here really is encouraging, because it means that if these guys stay within the program, they could really grow within the system. And by the time they're juniors and seniors, this could really be the backbone of the defense in a couple years. So if they can find a way to make plays on special teams, get on the field, and make plays, we feel comfortable and confident about that room moving forward. And so we kind of said it when we started out, kind of reiterated here. Yes, it's a different looking room because there's a number of transfers here that come from all over the country. But this is confident as I've been in the secondary in quite some time. And if the front four can do its job, I think this could be one of the more surprising units on the entire roster that catches the attention of the people that follow the sport nationally, because they'll realize this isn't the same old Carolina defense, and they've got guys back there that can make plays in the passing game, but also stick their neck down in the run game and make plays as well.
Yeah, other guys that are on the roster that I think have opportunities here before I give my overall thoughts on the room. Javian Butts, the true freshman safety. I do think that he's a guy who was, as someone that was with the team in the spring, if he can put together a good fall camp, could get himself involved or at least be pushing for, one of those spots deeper on the depth chart for Carolina. And then at corner, you've got Christian Dunbar-Hawkins, the transfer from UCLA. He's a redshirt freshman. Same thing with Khalil Conley. Those are guys that I expect probably to be buried deeper on the depth chart, but you never know. They're guys that are going to be out there fighting, and especially at that cornerback spot with only Ty Adams seemingly like a guy that the staff can really trust at this point. And even that is really a loose term that I'm using right there based off of what we've seen early on in his career. I do think that there is opportunities for these guys to be able to step up. Some of the guys that are deeper, on the depth chart, guys that would be walk-ons, weren't guys that were recruited by the staff and part of the signing class that they had in 2025. You got Jermaine Anderson and Graham Rehentes, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And then you've got Reggie Love II, who is a former walk-on that does stick with the program. He is a sophomore, I believe, if I have that right. Yes, he is a sophomore. This will be his third year with Carolina and has spent all of that time out at the cornerback position. So that's the room overall. My thing is that when I look at this group, I think that the starting five is probably the most confident that I've been in a while, mainly the corners. I think that's where you feel really good because I really like Thaddeus Dixon. I think he's a great leader for this room. I've said that I believe by the end of the season, he will be an All-ACC member. And when I say that, I mean a first-team All-ACC guy. I really do think that he has that kind of potential. And in this conference, with the corners that this conference has, you're talking about Chandler Rivers at Duke, who is absolutely tremendous. There's another one that is slipping my mind that was a layup for first-team All-ACC. But there are a lot of guys in this room that are going to, in the ACC, that are going to have really strong seasons. And Carolina, I think, has a guy that they feel like is right up there with those guys. I think, having a guy that he can trust opposite of him will give Marcus Allen more confidence, even though he's probably going to be targeted a little bit more. I think, his senior season being in a system that, probably fits him a little bit better. Probably gives him a little bit, has been working on building his confidence and making him a little more consistent, I think is going to help. And then Gavin Gibson, I really like him coming over from East Carolina. What he did last year, I think can translate to this level. I do think that corner is one of the easier spots. When you look at the spots where transferring up from lower levels is going to be tough, you're looking mostly in the trenches. I think this is a spot where he should be able to transfer, put up similar numbers, and Carolina will be happy with that. And then I really like what Will Hardy has become at safety. I think the leadership will allow him to become a more confident player on the field. I think he is going to be more consistent because we started to see that a little bit towards the end of last year. I think that extends over this season, and I think you see him play well. The biggest concern for me is that strong safety spot or whatever spot Caleb Cost plays. Is he going to be able to bounce back from last year? If he does, then great. If not, Carolina's got to have a backup plan. That's why I'm hoping it's going to be at that safety spot because it could be Coleman Bryson. It could be a guy like Malcolm Ziegler because of the talent. It could be, someone like Peyton Waters because of the familiarity with the system. There are so many options back there for Carolina, and that's what I really love, is that the starting lineup is great. The depth is really good for Carolina at this position as well. So now we move on to special teams. We're not done just yet. We're going to close it out with the special teams unit for this year. And, this special teams unit really, I think, is one of the better ones that Carolina has had in a while. Now, again, this is projecting a lot of stuff. We're not, going to pound our chest over this group. But one, I really, really love the return game. I think it's in good hands. I would like to see maybe a little bit more aggressive punt returner than Will Hardy. I think that's probably the one guy that you're looking at and you're hoping that maybe some of the younger guys emerge there because he's a guy that, look, he was the guy that handled the punt return snaps in the game against Connecticut in the Fenway Bowl. Didn't really do anything. I mean, just fair caught a bunch of balls. I expect that's probably what he's going to be back there, is a very cautious returner, which is fine. That's something that, as long as he's catching the ball, it doesn't really matter. But I do think that hopefully there are some other guys on this roster that can prove to this staff that they are capable of handling that role. Guy like maybe Javarius Green, who could be looking to get involved on kick returns as well with Chris Culliver. Maybe that's a guy that ends up making, some sort of waves there and they can find someone that is a little more dynamic. Kick returner, you're not finding anyone that's more dynamic than Culliver. He only returned 5 kicks last year, turned it into 242 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's an average of 48.4 yards per return. The hope is that he will return more kicks this year, which I believe that is going to be the way that Carolina is going to have it. Remember, he was not the starter last year as a kick returner. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense considering what he did the previous year, but it is what it is. That staff is gone. This new staff should be using him in that role. Javarius Green will be a nice backup option there if needed. So, when you look at the return games, that's what you got to feel most confident about here, because the kicking game, you bring in Reese Verhoff, a guy that, has been pretty consistently a part of what Marshall has done in the last 3 seasons, kicked in 37 of the team's 39 games. It's been solid, not great. This past year hit 14 of his 19 field goal attempts and hit every extra point attempt. And then, Tom McGinnis, we know what he is at punter. I think that's going to be one of the more interesting things is he's got a little competition now where if he struggles, they can turn to Eastern Illinois transfer Jacob Horvath, who is an all Big South / OVC member last year, while averaging 44.1 yards per punt. But it's the return games that probably should have people most excited.
I think what I'm interested to see is how aggressive will Carolina be in the return game. Will they look to try to make game-changing plays, whether it's in the kickoff or the punt return stuff? Because, with Culliver, you've got a guy that can break the game open or that can at least flip the field for you. How aggressive are they going to be? Or will they trust him? It felt like under Mac Brown, they were just kind of reserved to let's just take it out from the 20, 25 and go from there. I would like to see maybe that be something different. With Will Hardy, it feels like for him, they just trust him. They know that he's A, going to catch the ball, B, and be a lot more aware of when to return or not. But it just felt like, and part of it is too, we were just so spoiled under Larry Fedora. That was the one area where Carolina was consistent. They were aggressive, and they really benefited off of that aggression. Wasn't necessarily the same case with Mac Brown and company. I'd like to maybe get back to that with Bill Belichick. He's going to emphasize it because, there weren't many times you saw bad special team units up there in New England. So I do think Carolina will be a lot more sound in terms of their coverages and stuff. But I would maybe like to see them be just a little bit more aggressive, especially in the kickoff game with a guy like Chris Culliver who could really impact the game in that area. And then you look at some of the other stuff, Tom McGinnis. I will be interested to see if he has some of the struggles, he had previously. Will there be a change to him? Because he wasn't able to flip field position the way you want a punter to be able to flip field position. And so you've got some competition in that room. So maybe that's going to be a difference this upcoming year. But I think Carolina's got to be able to flip field position a lot better in terms of having someone that can kick the ball a long ways and then to go cover and make tackles. So we'll have to see just how this all, I guess, ultimately plays out. But I expect Carolina to, I would imagine, be a little bit more aggressive in the kickoff game just because you have a guy that, has proven if he touches the ball in that department, has the ability to take it all the way to the end zone.
Yeah, I think they'll be aggressive, and I think that's part of the reason why with Will Hardy, you would expect that at some point they are going to find someone that is a little more explosive there because, special teams under Bill Belichick at the NFL level, look, it was really built on great field goal kicking, great punting, and the return games were solid. He had guys that were mainstays on the special teams unit. He's looking for guys that are going to be, leaders. We've talked about some of those other guys that are going to be playing some of the other positions. But a guy like Chris Culliver, you can be a leader with the way that you play and the way that you return the ball. So I fully expect that he's going to play a big part of what Carolina does it in the return game. This year, I think he's going to be a consistent returner that's going to be able to bring some of those explosive returns. That average will go down. There's no doubt about that. But I think you are going to see some big numbers from him. And I expect that, hey, look, we've been spoiled on special teams. This could be the next guy that we're spoiled by that has a really strong season as a returner. We'll see if it translates on the offensive side of the ball, but we know that he is capable of doing this. He's done this 2 years in a row now. He was really good a couple of years ago. I thought that he should have been the starting kick returner for the team last year. Wasn't out of the gate. And when they turned to him, he was really, really explosive. You saw it in the games against NC State and in the bowl game, of course, against UConn. He was pretty much Carolina's entire offense for the majority of that game. So I expect him to be very, very, one of the best in the conference, if not the best returner in the conference this year, and could earn all ACC honors at the end of it. With McGinnis, it's just you need him to be a guy that's a weapon for you. And I don't feel like he is. He was better last year, 41.1 yards per attempt on 51 attempts. And that was better than the 39.8 yards per punt that he had on 33 punts in 22. I think that was 23. But I mean, yeah, he's not a guy that can flip field position for you. And you've got a guy that averaged 44.1 yards per punt. 3 more yards per punt. That is a significant difference. He had 12 that went inside the 20, booted 15 over 50 yards on 54 punts. And I get it. That's another guy that's transferring up, but I think that's a position that usually is relatively the same. It's not really that much different. You can either punt it or you can't. You can either kick it or you can't. I think that's one where if McGinnis, continues to struggle, isn't able to be that weapon that Carolina needs him to be, they will turn to someone. They will turn to Horvath. And then, the only other guy that, Carolina has at the kicker position, if there are some struggles from Verhoff, is Gaetano Bartholomew, who, is a true freshman from Bergen Catholic High School, one of the best high schools in the entire country in Oradell, New Jersey. He was a guy that handled kickoffs in his final 2 seasons. 60 of his 127 kickoffs went for touchbacks. So he could be a guy that factors in that way, as a kickoff specialist, because I'm not sure if Verhoff is a guy that really shines in that area, but we'll have to wait and see with both of those guys what ends up playing out there. For Verhoff, it's just about being consistent the whole year, because last year, Noah Burnett, who was so good the year before, really fell apart down the stretch. That's when Carolina's probably going to need to make field goals, especially in those final 2 games of the season against rivals. You have to be able to make your field goals in those games, in those close games for Carolina, because that could be the difference. So hopefully he's able to do that a little bit better. Spencer Triplett is back handling the long snapper duties after doing so a year ago. He handled both of those duties. They didn't split them up like they had done in the previous few years. And then Florida transfer Gannon Burt will also be in the room as a long snapper. Expect him to be the guy next year and really just sit behind Spencer Triplett this year unless there is an injury. So that is your look at the defensive backs and the special teams units for Carolina. Guys, make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. You can read more about these guys, go back through our position previews, and give them a read. I told you, or I've been telling you, that on those articles, there are projected depth charts. So make sure you go and take a look at that. Now, the thing is that those projected depth charts are going to change a little bit. I'm going to put out an article here soon that's going to have the new depth chart, how I think it's going to look going into the season. And this is just off some of the intel that's been coming out of camp and all that kind of stuff. So I will do that for you guys on the website at HeelToughBlog.com. That'll be coming out sometime this week. Also, early this next week, we will have our scouting report on Travis Burgess. Got a chance to catch up and watch the end of the game from the other night earlier today. And so I am currently working on that. That should be out tomorrow for you guys, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. Travis wasn't the greatest performance that we've seen from him in his high school career, but a great job of bouncing back, making plays when he had to, and that's the most important thing for a guy at the high school level that you're hoping is going to come in here and eventually be a part of the quarterback solution for Carolina as they look to find the next great quarterback to slot in there with guys like Sam Howell, Drake May, all those guys. So, yeah, make sure that you guys are keeping an eye on the website for all of that stuff. The breakout players, that'll be coming your way. Bold prediction should be coming your way as well before the season starts. And then, of course, when it comes to that TCU game, we're going to be getting you prepared on the website. We're also going to be getting you prepared on the podcast side of things. Everything that you need to know about TCU going into that matchup, our game predictions, our keys to the game, all of that stuff. You know how we do the previews on the website side of things where we go with team breakdowns, stat breakdowns for you guys, injury reports, all of that stuff. And this year, they are required to put out an injury report before the day of the game. So we will have some updated injury reports for you guys whenever we put those up. Make sure that you are keeping a lookout for that this season. So, on the basketball side of things, everything relatively quiet now. We've gotten the news that we needed to get. Now we're just waiting for the eligibility of Luka Bogovac from the NCAA. Will that come down soon? Hopefully it will. And we'll be on top of that news. Josh will have you covered if that news comes down. And, of course, any recruiting news around Carolina, he has you covered on that front as well. So make sure that you guys head over to the YouTube page. Give us a subscription over there. If you are someone that likes to watch the podcast, we greatly appreciate that. YouTube is a great place to watch it. Any of these sites are a great place to watch it, but we are pushing our YouTube page right now, so make sure you go over there and at least check it out and give us a subscription. We would greatly appreciate that. Same thing, if you're a listener to the podcast and you haven't found the podcast just yet, or you just found the podcast and you haven't subscribed just yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. That will really help us out with that, and it will allow you to not miss any editions of the show as we go throughout this upcoming season, which is expected to be one of the more exciting ones in Tar Heel history. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heel.